so much of my time I spend online. And I think that not having sovereignty over that, it makes me feel like I live on rented land, right? Like I'm like living in someone else's space, and I don't like that. Like I want like freedom in this digital world as well. If you want to create the best AI, then you need the best data. You kind of need that privacy in order to have permissions and incentives around data. The one-liner I'd say is basically like programmable data rights for AI. I was like, I'm running like a central bank basically in my dorm room. Like how amazing is that? AI has opened up this opportunity where people actually care about giving a large language model context on all of their past messages, where previously the idea of like, I don't know, a giant export of your email data, like what are you really going to do with that?
We are live. Well, Anna, welcome to the Building in Public podcast. Excited to have you here. I wanted to start off by asking you how the SF crypto scene is these days. So I heard it's getting a lot better. I think Vance from Framework tweeted something. I saw you did an event with David from Glow. So what's happening on the ground in SF with respect to crypto these days?
Yeah, I think there was a big move of crypto from SF to New York, but I think actually crypto AI has really brought a lot of it back because SF is kind of like the AI hub. And now, yeah, there's also kind of non-AI crypto coming back. So yeah, I'd say good builder energy. I think a lot of the consumer crypto is still kind of in New York, and more like financial institutional crypto is still in New York. But a lot of the like maybe more technical builders or like building at some intersection of AI are out here.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And I think the dust has settled now somewhat in terms of DeepSeek, but I'm curious your take on all of that came out, specifically in regards to like the AI race in general and user privacy when interacting with DeepSeek models, for instance.
Yeah, I think DeepSeek like definitely turned the industry on its head, right? Where like previously there was kind of this consensus belief, which was it's going to cost you $1 billion to train an AI model if you want to build a frontier model. And what DeepSeek showed us is that actually you can do it a lot more efficiently, whether it costs $5 million or kind of what those exact numbers were. Like they have created a way more efficient method of training. There are a bunch of things they've done to make that possible, right? So like they've kind of split, the model up into this kind of like mixture of experts thing that makes it, they basically made a bunch of very clever optimizations. And then they've also been really smart about data. And so maybe you've heard this term kind of like reinforcement learning, which was like the major breakthrough of DeepSeek, where they're able to kind of start with a small amount of really high quality data and then almost like bootstrap the model to teach it to teach itself off of that, right? I like to have an analogy of AI models towards just human beings learning, right? And human beings generally like are taught and kind of learn from data to the point where they can go and start like almost generating their own data, right? And start like learning. But it's important that the foundation you're learning from is really high quality. And so, with DeepSeek, I actually think they hired, I'm not sure. Yeah, it's kind of in the paper. I should get you exact numbers, but they basically have very high quality data that they started from, and that's what allowed them to sort of scale this in the way that they did. So that's been cool to see. I think it's also kind of this debate of like closed AI versus kind of more open models, and they have done a really great job there. I think there's a lot of honestly like regulatory capture that some of the existing big AI players have been pushing. A lot less so right now, maybe more like a year ago. And so I think it's great to see and net really positive for like builders who can kind of build whatever they want, users who can host the model locally if they want, kind of like maintain their privacy. One other thing I'd mention about DeepSeek is I think it has brought back some conversation related to where's your data stored, right? Who has access to your data? Because DeepSeek is, it's hosted in China, I assume. I actually don't know where their servers are, but I assume if you're using the hosted version of it, I think U.S. consumers have had questions, right? Which is like, could another government get my data? I think that is net a very good thing, right? Of people asking the question and kind of being more aware, because especially when you're working with AI, data really is like that core resource, right? And so if it's leaking or going somewhere, that matters. I think there's a little more nuance to the DeepSeek conversation where because it's open source, you could host it on a US server or wherever you want. But I think it has been a really good kind of like moment of awareness across US consumers.
For sure. And just in the back of my head, I talked to Miguel at Nilian this morning for another podcast episode. So also like very relevant conversation to DeepSeek and to this one. And yeah, it seems like there are ways to allow users to interact with an open source model that is, R1 from DeepSeek while preserving their privacy. And so they've built some kind of blind guru like demo thing that does that. There's a few other companies that have as well. But my maybe like industry outsider take, I'm more focused on Deepin, but AI has obviously become a big deal. My industry outsider take was that like no matter, there's a lot of like fog of war that was going on when the DeepSeek news first came out and no one really knew what had happened. But regardless of how much they spent or how much compute they had or whatever else, like the fact that they built a model that was competitive with OpenAI and then they open sourced it, I feel like basically like caught the open source kind of AI industry up to the closed source one. I'm not sure how far apart they were. I've heard different things, but that's kind of like the end result, right? And so now we can see where that all goes. But that was my take on it.
Yeah, I think it's been like a major kind of shift in narrative within AI, where previously I think the consensus take was these big AI companies have this massive lead and they have a moat, and we don't know actually what they have, right? So they might have a model they haven't released. I think that actually is still unknown, but I think it's a really good thing that there's an open source model that's so capable. And I think there's also been a lot of incentive, which has like convinced a lot of people like, open source AI just can't catch up. And that just like turned it on its head.
Yeah, no, which is great. You learned about crypto while you were at MIT. What got you obsessed with user-owned data specifically as a concept or an idea to build a company around?
Yeah, so I first got exposed to crypto because I really liked like centralized currencies, which is like such an unusual reason to get into crypto. But yeah, I had like picture of Janet Yellen in my high school bedroom, like worked at the Fed in high school, just like huge central bank fan, because to me currency was like central to it all, and like monetary policy was like really important to me. I saw it as like this really important tool in the economy. And so yeah, got to MIT and learned about decentralized currencies, started mining ETH, and I was like, I'm running like a central bank basically in my dorm room. Like, how amazing is that? And I think what that showed me is that you can build systems that are like actually better than the centralized version, because you can have many different people who don't even know each other coordinated through one of these decentralized networks and kind of get cryptographic guarantees as well. And that was like this power of decentralization and this power of like self-sovereignty. The guy who got me into like Ethereum and kind of the 5% MIT Bitcoin club, like didn't use fiat, never wore shoes, only drank Soylent, was like a really radical character, extremely private. And I don't know, it was sort of like seeing that you could almost bring these very self-sovereign principles to the digital world is what got me interested. And then I started to see it's actually a solid project, which is started by Tim Berners-Lee, who's the original creator of the internet, out of MIT, where he was kind of working on ways for users to host their data, and then be able to kind of bring it across different applications. It kind of is some interesting history there where I think he talks about how maybe the web and the internet didn't play out as he'd like, where now, yeah, you kind of have these hordes of data that are stuck in the walled gardens of big tech. But yeah, I started paying more attention to that actually because I was training AI models, where like I was doing some AI research at CSAIL, MIT's like AI lab, and I kept just wanting more data. Like I was like just trying to find places to get the data I needed to train better models. And I had seen how great like and effective decentralized systems are at bringing a large group of people together towards some goal or pooling some resource, whether it's compute or in Vana's case, data. And so that is where the very early kind of beginnings of Vana began. So it's basically like, okay, if you want more data, how can you get it? And then there's also this more ideological kind of like self-sovereign piece, which is I don't know. I'm like I like so much of my time I spend online, like a lot of my existence is actually digital, right? And I think that not having sovereignty over that, it makes me feel like I live on rented land, right? Like I'm like living in someone else's space and I don't like that. Like I want like freedom in this digital world as well. And so that is what like user owned data means to me from an ideological perspective. But then there's also this tactical piece of like, okay, if you want to create the best AI, then you need the best data.
Yeah, makes a ton of sense. Cool to hear the backstory and what got you motivated. What is Vana building specifically, and what's the why now? Or why is there a why now moment for Vana in terms of just like the increasing pace of AI and kind of like the data that it needs to feed off of?
Yeah. So from a technical perspective, Vana is a layer one blockchain that can work with private data. Usually you don't want to have private data on a blockchain because blockchains are public, right? Those are like things that generally don't play that well together. But privacy and kind of having economic incentives around data are very tightly tied, right? Because if your data is public, then you can't really block someone from having access to it. So you kind of need that privacy in order to have permissions and incentives around data. The one-liner I'd say is basically like programmable data rights for AI. In terms of the why now, I'll talk about it kind of one from an AI perspective, which is AI models need more and more data to get better, higher quality data to get better. We saw that with DeepSeek. We also saw that with, and maybe you've heard the term the data wall that the AI research community has been talking about, where we're like literally out of data, right? So like if you look at the whole public internet, 15 trillion words, Llama 3 is trained on 15 trillion words. So we've basically run out. And the question is like, where do you get more data? Most of it is sitting inside these different companies. And what you're able to do with Vana is kind of export your data from these different platforms. Most people don't realize they own their data, but in the same way that if you park your car in a parking lot, the parking lot doesn't own your car. If you put your data in a platform, it's still yours. You can always go and take it back. There's actually some data regulation that helps from that perspective as well. And so, yeah, I'd say it's really just like this wave of AI and massive like data shortage that's driving things. There's also this aspect of like the idea of data sovereignty, like bring your data to any application. That's been around for a while. Like I actually see that as part of the early vision of Ethereum, but crypto has never really delivered on it. And I think a lot of it has been because projects have stayed too much at this ideological level, which is like, hey, you should use this decentralized social network because then you own your data and that's better ideologically. But like you have to be a little bit more tactical, right? A user wants to know, what's the thing I could do now that I couldn't do before? Like it's not just like an ideological thing. And I think AI has opened up this opportunity where people actually care about giving a large language model context on all of their past messages, right? How they're doing, all of their past emails, and kind of a whole bunch of context and knowledge, where previously the idea of like, I don't know, a giant export of your email data, like what are you really going to do with that? So I think that's been a shift in terms of the use cases that are possible as well.
Definitely. And maybe you touched a bit on it before, but I want to go a little deeper because it's an interesting design choice. Like why build an L1 itself in today's day and age where there's a decent amount of high throughput block space available out there today?
Yeah, I feel like that's kind of this constant question across the industry, right? Of like, how many more L1s do we need? How many more L2, right? And I think like even for us, like we looked at, could an L2 make sense? One of the trade-offs with an L2 is basically you're saying, I'm okay with more centralization in exchange for scalability. And Vana is kind of this really unique design space where we're designing for private personal data, right? And so that also comes with some regulatory constraints as well. One of them is if you are classified as a data processor, then you need to give users the right to delete, right? So if we built Vana as an L2, at least as they're built today, but generally it's this centralization trade-off, that node would be considered a data processor and need to give users the right to delete, which is basically not possible in a blockchain context, right? And so that's one example of kind of the different trade-offs at play in terms of like, how do you, like for us, actually, I think the way to think about it is like, okay, why can't you just use a giant database, right? That's like the first question you should actually ask. Not even like, why can't I deploy to another chain? It's like, okay, so suppose we start with literally a centralized database. Why won't that work? okay, so in Vana's case, it won't work because then that centralized entity is basically regulated as this data processor. And the issue that you run into there is kind of like data regulation. The regulation point actually kind of reminds me of how like Ethereum and Bitcoin, they make you your own bank, right? They're not acting as your bank. Like you are your bank and you are self-custodying your funds because you have your private key. And in the same way for Vana, like you are your own data processor, right? You are holding those keys. You are like actually in full self-sovereign control. And so, yeah, to get those properties, we need pretty aggressive decentralization of the nodes that are keeping state of those data transactions, and some specific kind of like optimizations for data transactions. But yeah, I think like any founder should basically ask the question, why can't I put this in a centralized database, and then go from there, right? And then like, okay, why not an existing L1? Okay, why not an L2? I also think that we're going to end up in a very interoperable world where today, I mean, I think people see some difference, but more and more it's just going to be like you're interacting with applications, and a lot of the interoperability stuff should just happen behind the scenes. And so it's a little bit less of an extreme decision. But yeah, I mean, it's also kind of this, like Vana's acting as this base layer where like all the data is written, kind of settled, verified, and then you can allow for a lot of different AI applications to exist on top. So you also have this aspect of kind of building an ecosystem of developers. A lot of the builders in Vana, some of them are like Web3 native, some of them are more from kind of like Web2 AI. And so, yeah, it's almost like you're building your own kind of ecosystem, community, country on top of those different primitives around data.
Yeah, so Vana's, like you said, this base layer kind of infrastructure for data sovereignty, user data rights. Let's talk about data DAOs, because that's kind of like the app, or the application that's built on top. So I would think most people know what data DAOs are, but just give us a quick explanation in case someone hasn't heard of what they are, and then how do they fit into the Vana ecosystem?
Yeah, so a data DAO is kind of like a labor union for data, where you're basically having a pool of data. The technical term, if you're a developer within Vana, it's called like a data liquidity pool, which is a very, DLP is kind of what it's short for. Most people think of them as just data DAOs, kind of from a marketing perspective, easier to understand. A DAO stands for decentralized autonomous organization. Basically what it is it's like a way to make decisions about an aggregate pool of data. When you're working with data for AI, like I can't do that much with just your own data, right? You can do a lot more when you have a whole pool of data. So that data liquidity is basically enabling people to like pool their data and have enough to work with. There are a bunch of different data DAOs. There's one based around like 23andMe data, so genetic data. There's a Twitter one. There's one based around car data. You can start a data DAO around any data set of your choosing because the users have the legal right to their data. They can kind of go and get it. And then what it means to join a data DAO is that you come in, you log in with your wallet, like any EVM wallet. Kind of the interface is something that's put out by the data DAO. You contribute your data in. And in that step, there are two pieces of it. So one, you're writing your data to the Vana network, which is just permissioned by your wallet. And then two, you're signing a transaction that says, okay, now I'm going to grant access to my data to this data DAO. And the data DAO can now make decisions about my data in this aggregate way. And one of the decisions they can make is to like train an AI model on their data. So there's a company like Flower AI that's training an AI model across the different data DAOs. And so they've gone through kind of the process of saying like, yes, we're okay with you guys using the data, and kind of the users have agreed to that. One thing too I'll note is that the process of getting that approval right now, it's a little bit inconvenient, right? But in traditional Web2 data collection, it takes like 3 to 6 months to get the data you want. So it's relatively better. But in the long run, I see actually like the data DAOs kind of having this like smart contract, which just decides, hey, if it's privacy preserving AI training, that's totally fine. Like we're just going to auto accept that as long as it pays us some amount.
Right. And as a user, how do I actually contribute my data to the data DAO? Say that they're built on Vana. Like, is there some kind of sign in with username and password, like ZKTLS scheme, or like, yeah, how does the data get from, say, like some 23andMe website to the data DAO. And is that Genome's
Yeah.
DAO, by the way?
There are actually two. So
Okay.
there's one that is focused on cancer, which might be Genome's DAO, and then there's one that is started by Naka Mining, and their goal is to like buy 23andMe the company outright. They actually never want to sell the data. They want to like make it so the company can't sell the data, which is almost like the opposite of a data DAO, but also what's possible. Yeah, so in terms of like the interface and the experience, yeah, you log in with your wallet. In terms of how you contribute your data, it depends on the data DAO. So some of them have like a Chrome extension. Some of them have you upload an export and then upload some kind of proof that's kind of verifying that that data actually came from the source. The default way to do data verification with Vana is in a set of TEEs, like trusted execution environments, that are basically running the code to check, okay, this data is actually yours and this is kind of the quality that's expected. There are some integrations with like ZK email. There's like a ZK TLS option, which I think at least a few are using, that basically do that check. And it's different for each data set.
Yeah. So, okay. So a bunch of different ways to get your data in. That makes sense. I run the podcast for Opacity, which is a ZK TLS player. And so I've learned a lot more about like their approach to all of this. But what other approaches have you seen working? I mean, I know on some webs like Web2 websites, you can kind of like download a CSV or something of your data, but then like the data DAO probably wouldn't be able to trust that you're uploading real data from that website.
Yeah. The Amazon Prime one does this, where basically they have a Chrome extension that generates like a ZK proof client side when you do that download. So it actually can check it. And then there's another, like, I think that the way they did it for ChatGPT is they verify the email that you got from ChatGPT with your exported file. And so it kind of depends on basically what is the verifiable step in that data export. And then people kind of build around that. There are also some clever things I've seen where they will give you a code to put in your public bio, where basically to prove that you own this account, you have, yeah. So that's some stuff people have done. I'm trying to think of some other interesting verification methods. Yeah, but like the verification standard just needs to follow this proof format for Vana, where we're saying like, okay, this is the data that you're verifying. This is kind of the proof of it. And then you can map that back to the data DAO so you understand exactly what guarantee you have.
Got it. And then in the decentralized social or just like social context, so it's good to know like user generated content on say like Instagram or Twitter is owned by the user, but I would think the Web2 platforms still like have equal rights to it, or there's something in the terms and conditions that lets them kind of like own it as well. So how do we get to a world where users themselves like solely are the only ones that own their data? Like, does it need to be a full shift to like only decentralized social platforms, or like how do you see that evolving?
Yeah, I think this is actually something that a lot of Web3 people like actually get wrong, where they assume, okay, if we want to build like a user-owned version of the internet, we have to restart from scratch, right? But if you look at the law, like users own all their data, right? If you go get your Instagram export, they give you not just like your messages, your posts, your photos, they even give you the data that they've generated about you. So like the AI labels they put on you. One of them they put on me was stressed but not depressed. Like it's actually
Are you
hilarious. Like you should
serious?
go export your data, right? And so they give you this list of like 300 labels and it's legally yours, right? Like that's how the and when you sign the terms of service box, right? Then you are actually granting them access, like a pretty permissive license. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's yours. I think that like something I would want to see is having data DAOs actually use some of the leverage they have to negotiate better terms of service. And we're already starting to see some of like I think that Reddit actually changed their terms of service following the Reddit data DAO. I don't think 23andMe has made any progress, or that DAO, the genetic one, has made progress on changing the 23andMe terms, but it's possible, right? It's sort of not just for financializing your data, it's also about like negotiation. And I think we'll start to see more and more of that over time, especially as people become more aware, like we saw with DeepSeek and people being like, well, where exactly is my data going?
Yeah. Do you see data DAOs or the end consumer as like your main client, right? Because you're selling like block space kind of on the one hand, but you're also selling like a solution for consumers. But I guess you're not selling directly to them because like you want the data DAOs to go out and use what you've built to improve the lives of end users.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is like for any like project, like you need to help on kind of the consumer adoption side, right? Because if the data DAOs aren't successful, then Vana's not success, right? So you kind of do
Yeah.
need that piece. My co-founder Art used to work in Web2 data sales, so he really understands like data collection, kind of what works, what doesn't. So yeah, I think that there is some aspect of kind of like building trust with the end user. And there's actually some stuff we're working on there where potentially having like an easy way to contribute your data across different data DAOs. And so that's the sort of application I'd like to see. The other thing I'd mention is that data DAOs are like the data onboarding tool to bring data onto the Vana network. Once it's there, anyone can build an application that uses that data, right? So there's also this whole other category of applications which are consuming the data. And this part, it's technically built into the protocol, but like basically not accessible to developers today, where you're able to have a user log in with their wallet and like bring all their data with them. So then you can have like AI agents powered by this, like personalized AI powered by this. And I think that that is one of the applications that I'm most excited about over the next kind of 6 to 12 months.
And do you mean sign in with wallet and bring their on-chain data with them or other types of
Bring
data?
their data on Vana, which is their private data with them.
Okay. So like what types of data if I sign in with my wallet,
Yeah.
for
So you
instance,
could
like,
bring, like, for example, you could sign in, and then if you've joined the, like, there's a Telegram data DAO, you could grant access to an AI model that has all of your Telegram messages as context. And then you have this like hyper personalized, well, still secure, right? Because you're in full control of that data. I would use it for is like, yeah, trying not to fall behind on Telegram or kind of the smarter AI. There are also some kind of like health type applications. So there's a data DAO that has you connect your sleep data. There's a new one that has you can connect your medical records, right? So you could log in and then bring your medical records, your sleep data, what you've eaten, and sort of get insights about how to be kind of healthier or live longer.
right. And I mean, say I did that or user did that and kind of brought in their Telegram data. Like it's great that I own it and I can choose who to make it available to and at what time. But do you guys plan to build out the part of the stack that's like the decentralized compute or like trustless verifiability like zk-TLS would provide or like Nillion would provide on the compute side? Or would you like want to partner with a company like that? Because that's like I guess the extension of like privacy is like compute over that private data.
Exactly. Like the question is basically, okay, when you work with unencrypted data, where is that compute actually running, right? And so right now we use TEEs that are kind of built in, and we're open. I don't think there's an integration with Nillion yet, but I know there's some kind of conversation there. And so I think there are, yeah, a bunch of opportunities in the space of like, what's the best way to do privacy preserving compute on data. Today we have kind of like the programmable data access, which is making a trust assumption at the hardware level on TEEs, but that allows for like preserving privacy of the data, right? Because if you can add data that's verified to the network, but you can't actually really work with it, then you haven't really accomplished the goal.
Yeah, doing these 2 or 3 podcasts in quick succession has like really helped me put the chain of events together in terms of like getting verifiable data with zk-TLS, then like computing on it. Well, I guess then deciding where it goes with you guys, who to contribute it to, and then computing on it is like the last step. But really interesting. Want to touch on tokenomics real quick here at the end. So how do the tokenomics work at a high level? Like what is the protocol looking to incentivize, and how does value accrue to the token if it does?
Yeah. So the Vana native token is like L1 gas fee token. So any data transaction, whether it is verifying data, adding data to the network, granting access to the data, running access on the data, that is charged in Vana. And then there are all these data set specific tokens. which are paired in a DEX pool. So it's like dataset token with Vana across the different DEX pools that govern access to specific datasets. You can think of those as kind of like an ERC20 token, right? So it's like a token standard for these different data tokens. There's a fee switch which is not on right now related specifically to data sales, where like a portion of data sales must be burned in Vana, a portion of it must be burned in the data token. And then I'm just thinking of like any other aspects. Oh, in terms of what's incentivized. So there are emissions that go towards onboarding data to the network that's high quality and that's actually used. And that's really to kind of like bootstrap the network effects of like having many users onboarded who already have their data ready to go and kind of use across applications. And then in terms of the sinks, it's like basically whenever data is used, it's like some small index of that.
Gotcha. And earlier you said data sets would have their own specific tokens. Do you mean like user generated data sets or the data DAOs themselves, right? Because there's this whole system of like 16 data DAOs that
Yeah,
receive
yeah. So
emissions.
every data DAO has their own data set specific token.
Okay.
Mhm.
So it's like a data DAO specific token too. It's like one and the
Yeah,
same.
yeah. And then the top 16 data DAOs earn a share of emissions that can help their data token kind of, it can help see liquidity and stuff like that.
Super cool. Well, anything you want to touch on that we haven't highlighted yet before we wrap up here?
In terms of like where to position Vana on the stack, because you're mentioning kind of like this verifiability piece, then also the compute piece, like our goal is to really take this bet on, it's basically like I think data will act sort of like how liquidity acts in DeFi protocols, where like where do builders want to build? Where liquidity is, right? And what we're seeing is like where do AI builders want to build? Where data is, right? So our goal is just like, okay, have a place where you have access to all of that data and really use that as the core kind of driving force behind getting large scale adoption of like self-sovereign data. So yeah, that's the thing I would add about like why we care so much about being that data layer for AI and making sure that it's self-sovereign.
100%. Yeah, and that's probably some of the reasoning behind like EVM versus SVM building. There's just like more data on the EVM too, and then also having your own chain right on top of that. But super cool. Thank you for coming on. Where would you like to point our listeners to in terms of finding out more about you or Vana?
I think probably Twitter. Yeah, so just go to at Vana. We finally got this handle we were buying for
I
a
saw
while.
that.
And
Yeah,
then yeah, I'm at Twitter. You can just find something. Vana's retweeted by me. My last name's kind of hard to spell. Mhm.
super cool. Well, thank you for coming on.